Great. Hello, everyone. Hi, George. Hi, Maggie.
Good morning.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And we are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. So if you're joining us, you're here for our informational webinar for the 2025 Delta Science Fellowship Program. So we have about an hour and a half of time slotted for our webinar today. And we will go through some slides, some information about California Sea Grant, the Delta, and then dive into application specifics. And what we're going to do today is we'll go through some housekeeping items and agenda, and of course, we'll do some introductions as well. All right. So just keep in mind, as we go through our webinar today, we're providing what is the most up-to-date information for the request for application as of May 22nd, 2024. But as you are going through this process and developing your application materials, it's really important that you refer back to the RFA on our website to ensure that you have the most up-to-date information in terms of content and deadlines for important dates. So just keep in mind, it's really important to refer to that RFA when preparing your application. And as we go through our webinar, we are going to use a couple of different functions. And I have my colleague here, Leon, who will be dropping important relevant links in our chat. So if you want to revisit the RFA during our time, you're welcome to do so. All right. So we're going to do some introductions, and we've got four folks with us who are joining our webinar today who are program leads for this fellowship program. So I'll start with myself. My name is Delaney Medina. I am the fellowship program coordinator with California Sea Grant, and I work on the science integration team. So I will be someone that you might be in contact with throughout this process to help support and answer any questions you might have. And I'm going to take a moment to pass it over to my colleague and my supervisor, Leon Gua.
Hi, good morning, folks. My name is Leon Gua. I'm the research coordinator for California Sea Grant, overseeing our competitive research grant programs.
Thank you, Leon. And Leon today will be, again, dropping links and resources in our webinar chat that you can access throughout. And then I want to also provide a space and platform for our Delta staff to introduce themselves. So I'm going to pass it over to Maggie.
Thanks, Delaney. So I'm Maggie Christman. I'm a program manager at the Delta Science Program, which is a big division within the Delta Stewardship Council. And I will pass this over to my colleague, George.
Good morning. Thanks, Maggie. My name is George Isaac, and I'm with the science program for the Delta Stewardship Council. And I will be on the panel and talking a little bit about the science tracker and other things. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maggie. And thank you, George. So Maggie and George are going to pop in and out to discuss the Delta Science Program, Delta Stewardship Council, and this particular opportunity. Myself and Leon, we're also here to help answer questions, and I'll be discussing parts of the application that are really important and relevant to you as an applicant. So what are the objectives for today? So we are here today to describe the purpose and management needs for the Delta Science Fellowship Program in respect to the Delta Science Program, the Delta Stewardship Council, and we'll be touching on something known as the Science Action Agenda, which if you've been going through this application, you've probably noticed that quite a bit, that it is a very important part of your application. We'll review components of the RFA. And then at the end, we are going to provide some application tips and just things to keep in mind as you develop your whole proposal for this research opportunity. Throughout, if you have questions, you are welcome to drop those questions in the Q&A. So we are going to just use the webinar chat function to drop links to all of you to access. But if you have specific questions, you can drop those into our Q&A box with our webinar, and we will answer them live. Or we can also type questions to you or responses to your questions directly. So please, this is a space that you have us available to you to ask those questions. A couple things to keep in mind. If you have very specific questions regarding your actual project and proposal, we do ask that you actually reserve those for just emailing us directly. So we really want to aim not to answer very specific project-based questions today, because sometimes those take a back and forth dialogue to respond and to get you the answer that you need. So if you have very hyper-specific questions relevant to your project only, we're going to ask that you email those to sgproposal@ucsd.edu. And throughout this application process for this fellowship, that's the email you can always reach out to directly with any questions, even regarding budget, notice of intent, anything related to this fellowship. One more thing to keep in mind, we hope you can join for the entirety of the webinar, but if not, we are going to be recording this and we'll be posting it on the request for application webpage along with a PDF of the slide deck, so you can revisit the slides later on as well. All right, so let's get started with a quick introduction of who California Sea Grant is and some of the work that we do. So California Sea Grant, we are part of a larger network. There are 34 university-based Sea Grant programs across the nation. And all of these programs are situated in a coastal state. We're also in the Great Lakes states, and then we're in US territories, Guam and Puerto Rico, and there is one international program in Korea. And we were put into implementation in 1966, and that was authorized by the National Sea Grant College and Program Act. And you can see really our mission is to provide the information, tools, training, and relationships needed to help conserve California's coastline. We do that through a number of different avenues. With California Sea Grant, our work includes fellowships. We run competitive grant research opportunities. And we have a lot of work through what's called our extension program. And so that is where we have specialists up and down the state of California positioned at different academic institutions where they work alongside colleagues, researchers, industry partners, community members in order to understand and assess the needs of different communities throughout the state of California to help drive our mission forward. So the Delta Science Fellowship is one of the many fellowships that we do offer with California Sea Grant, and we help facilitate this fellowship for the Delta Stewardship Council. So it's one of our very important fellowship opportunities that we run, as we have many different things that we do with the Delta. So this is one of many. And if you're not familiar, California Sea Grant, we are positioned at UC San Diego. And where we are located is at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So we are based out of La Jolla. However, we do conduct work and research and education that represents the entire state of California. All right. So just wanted to provide a quick introduction to California Sea Grant, and then I'm going to pass it over to Maggie to talk a little bit more about the Delta Science Program and the Delta Stewardship Council as a whole.
Thank you. So the Delta Stewardship Council is an independent state agency that was created by the 2009 Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Reform Act. The agency was tasked through that legislation with developing a comprehensive, long-term, and legally enforceable plan, which we call the Delta Plan, to guide how multiple federal, state, and local agencies are managing the Delta's water and environmental resources. The Delta Reform Act directs the Council to coordinate implementation of the Delta Plan, to provide oversight of state and local agencies proposing to carry out, fund, or approve Delta-related actions, and to base its work on the best available science. So the mission of the Delta Stewardship Council is to advance the state's co-equal goals for the Delta, which means achieving a more reliable water supply for the state of California, protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Delta's ecosystems, and doing both of these in a manner that also protects and enhances the unique characteristics of the Delta as an evolving place in which people live, work, and recreate. So next slide. The Delta Science Program is a division within the Council with a mission to provide the best possible scientific information for water and environmental decision-making for the Bay Delta system. This mission is carried out through funding research, synthesizing and communicating scientific information, promoting independent scientific peer review, and coordinating with Delta agencies to promote science-based adaptive management. The Delta Plan calls for the Delta Science program to develop a Delta Science Plan, which is a shared guidance document intended to provide vision, principles, and approaches to better coordinate Delta science and more effectively communicate the outcomes of science activities and their management implications to policymakers. The Delta Science Plan proposes ways to conduct science in an open and transparent manner that supports the concept of One Delta, One Science, which is an open Delta science community that works collaboratively to build a shared body of scientific knowledge with the capacity to adapt and inform water, environmental, and societal decisions. Next slide. So as I said previously, one of the ways in which the Delta Science program carries out its mission of providing the best possible scientific information is through funding research. So the purpose of the Delta Science Fellowship Program is to provide funding and support through which to train the next generation of science leaders for the Delta. The fellowship program brings together fellows with research mentors and community mentors in collaborative research, data analysis, and synthesis projects relevant to Delta policy and management. Fellowships provide up to 2 years of support, which includes stipends and research, as well as educational expenses for biophysical and social science projects. Eligible applicants include postdocs, graduate students at the PhD and master's levels. And we're excited that this is going to be our 14th cohort of fellows. So next slide. So the goals of our Delta Science Fellowship Program are to engage highly qualified scientific talent to help advance the state of knowledge for social and biophysical science on high priority management needs and science actions, specifically those that are identified in the Science Action Agenda, which I'll talk more about in a second on the next slide. In addition, the fellowship program supports the training and development of social and biophysical scientists to work on research projects that support resource management in the Delta and contributes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in Delta science. And last but not least, the fellowship aims to promote scientific partnerships across research institutions, agencies, nonprofit organizations, Delta communities, and across multiple disciplines. So next slide. So the research priorities for this year's Delta Science Fellows Program are based on the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda, which is a 4-year multidisciplinary agenda for Delta science that prioritizes and aligns science actions to inform management decisions. It also identifies major gaps in knowledge, promotes collaborative science, and informs science investments. The Science Action Agenda was developed through an open and collaborative process involving numerous state, federal, and local agencies, along with representatives from nonprofit organizations, local communities, universities, and non-governmental organizations through 2020 and 2021. So in the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda is built upon a vision of integration, recognizing that addressing complex management needs in the Delta requires integration across social and biophysical disciplines, across geographic boundaries, and across topics. This edition identifies 25 priority science actions that address the 6 management needs that are listed on this slide. Collectively, the 25 science actions identified in this document articulate major priorities for advancing science-based management in the Delta. As you'll see again later in this presentation, and I'll talk a little bit more about some specifics on this, your application must address how your proposed research addresses at least one or more science actions, which are responsive to the broad management needs that are listed here on the slide. So to really get into the Science Action Agenda, I refer you to links that are both in the RFA. There's a QR code on this slide. You can also go straight to our website, which has a pretty good way to explore the management needs and science actions under them. It's at scienceactionagenda.deltacouncil.ca.gov. I think we also just put a link in the chat. But we invite you to kind of explore it more and take a deeper dive beyond just the 6 broad areas that are listed on this slide. So with that, I'll hand things back over to Delaney.
Great. Thank you so much, Maggie. And to the points that Maggie made, these resources are going to be vital to preparing your application and making it competitive for our reviewers with the Delta. And so we have the QR code here for the Science Action Agenda to visit. And as Maggie mentioned, Leon's been dropping links in our webinar chat, so you can visit to learn more about the Delta Stewardship Council. and then the larger department within the council, the Delta Science Program, which Maggie and George work in. And then, of course, the Science Action Agenda. So those are going to be really vital resources in preparing your application. Thanks so much, Maggie. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about eligibility and, who are the right folks to be applying for this fellowship opportunity. So in terms of eligibility, you can see that this is a fellowship opportunity open to PhD and master's students as well as postdocs. And pretty straightforward, some things to keep in mind if you are interested in a postdoctoral fellowship as a Delta Science Fellow. It's important to keep in mind that your degree comes from a related field, and those can be listed under the relevant fellowship opportunities on the RFA. So being able to look to see what are the relevant degree programs and how does your research relate to the larger management needs of the Delta. And one of the requirements before starting this fellowship opportunity, which it would start in 2025, will be that you have a completed degree from a program in one of those related fields from an accredited US institution. If you would like to learn more about your eligibility in terms of your degree program, you're welcome to reach out to us directly to learn more. Now, for our PhD and master's applicants, your eligibility means that you have been enrolled or recently admitted to a PhD or master's program. And again, that is going to be in a related field at an accredited US institution of higher education. So again, you can revisit the RFA to learn more about what those relevant fields of study could be and should be in order to be the most qualified candidate for the Delta Science Fellowship. Now, one of the things to keep in mind for your eligibility is that proposed fellowship projects are not required to be physically located within the Delta. However, and this speaks to what Maggie was talking about with the science actions under those management needs in the Science Action Agenda, it's important that your project proposal be relevant to those needs. And we will touch on this later on, but being able to list up to 2 of those action needs or actions under those management needs within your project proposal is very important to make you a competitive candidate. So project activities must provide a demonstrable benefit or benefits to the Delta, and it's important to address those priority research topics that are identified in the SAA. One thing I do want to note in state is that California Sea Grant and the Delta Science Program are committed to building inclusive research extension, communication and education programs that serve people with unique knowledge, backgrounds, life experiences, needs, perspective, and ways of thinking. So please consider this statement of commitment in developing your application and sharing more about your background and who you are as an applicant. All right. So our fellowship awards, and again, I want to remind you, if you have questions, you're welcome to drop them in our Q&A chat. But we're going to talk a little bit about the awards. And one thing that we are really excited about is that we were able to increase our award amounts for this application run. And with that, that means it is an increase in the stipends, R&E expenses. And with that, it means we are able to support 5 fellows for this Delta Science Fellowship for the upcoming year. So you can see that the Delta Science Program and partner orgs are expected to sponsor a total of approximately 5. And that's going to be across multiple disciplinary areas. And you are welcome to ask for support for up to 2 years. And you can see the breakdowns of what that financial support looks like. So for a postdoctoral fellow, you can request up to 2 years of support, and that maximum request amount is $110,522. Now, below that, you're going to see a breakdown of what that looks like. So you can see a portion of that award is going to be in a stipend of $66,868. Keep in mind, this isn't a salary. These are not wage and benefits. And in addition to that, you can request up to $15,000 a year for your research and educational expenses. Now, with these 2 breakdowns combined, there's going to be a difference you can see in the maximum you're allowed to ask for. So with your research and education expenses, they are subject to up to 35% indirect cost rate. So when working with your academic institution, and we're going to touch on this a little bit when we get to our budgetary slide and talking about how you can build your budget, it's going to be really important that you're working with your campus in order to determine that IDC rate and how that impacts what you can ask for in your proposal. So what you need to budget for and allocate for. Moving to if you will be applying to be a PhD or master's fellow, so currently enrolled in a program, you can ask for up to 2 years of support with a maximum of $94,500 a year. And you can see the breakdown looks slightly different with $45,000 a year in stipend, and then $25,000 for those R&E costs, again, subject to that 35% IDC rate. Now, keep in mind, there's a slight difference with that R&E as a postdoctoral fellow and as a PhD master's fellow. And that is because if you are a PhD master's fellow, that takes into account tuition cost, which a postdoctoral fellow would not be subject to anymore. So for a PhD and master's fellow, it's also going to be vitally important that you are working with your campus to understand what portion of your award will be taken out or would be taken out for tuition and what the remainder would be for your stipend. So again, just things to keep in mind as you start to build your application once you fill out your notice of intent. All right. I do want to pause a moment just to see if my colleague Leon has anything to add. Being our research coordinator, that would be relevant to our awards slide here.
And I think you covered it well, Delaney. We can definitely address any questions that folks have about this specific part of the RFA.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leon. All right. Great. So we're going to move to what are the fellowship deliverables. So sort of setting the landscape of what the 2-year fellowship would look like in terms of what are expectations outside of conducting your research at your academic institution. So a couple of things that happen is when on the onset of the fellowship starting, you will submit a formal mentoring plan within the first month after the funds have been awarded. So this mentoring plan would be with your research mentor, and it's to help inform the delta of how you intend to conduct your research and how your research mentor is going to support you along that journey with your fellowship program. Some other things that happen throughout the 2-year fellowship or the 1 year if you're requesting up to 1 year is we do host an early career leadership workshop. That is the intended plan. We say if offered, it again is just dependent on fund availability. So we do ask for that for your participation in that workshop, which typically is hosted in Sacramento at the Natural Resources Agency building. Some other things you can be expected to provide in terms of project deliverables are presentations or briefings during the Delta Stewardship Council meetings, oral or poster presentations. And so these can happen at 2 major conferences, one being the Bay Delta Science Conference and or the State of the Estuary Conference. Outside of those 2 conferences, you are encouraged and supported to present at other relevant meetings, other statewide or national conferences as well. So those would just be subject to approval with your supervisor staff. Some other things, you will be asked to publish results from this fellowship in peer-reviewed open access journals. You will develop an annual progress report and final completion report. And something else that is going to be an active part of the fellowship, which we're going to have George touch on in our next slide, is adding to and maintaining projects on what is known as the Delta Science Tracker. So this is a really great project that's been in development and is going to be a vital resource for you during your fellowship, but also prior to your fellowship. And we'll talk about that when we go through with the application. So with that, I want to pass it over to George to talk about the Delta Science Tracker.
Thanks, Delaney. So the Delta Science Tracker is an online tool that was developed by the science program. It serves as a central hub to bring in all of the science activities in the Sacramento Delta area. So it's a great resource for managers and researchers where they can go and look at the different activities that's there, look at funding streams, and look at publications, etc. So this is something that as you develop your application, you can kind of go into and look for, when you're looking for opportunities for or information regarding mentors or information regarding other researchers and similar projects that you may also be working on. So I encourage all of you to go into the website and kind of check it around and see if there's anything that's helpful as you develop your application. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, George. And in our webinar chat, Leon dropped a link straight to the Delta Science Tracker. And on our slide deck, we also have a QR code where you can also access it. So I highly encourage our applicants or potential applicants to explore the tracker and see its functionality and see how it can be a resource for you while you develop your application materials. All right, we do want to take a moment just to pause and see if there are any questions. So you're welcome to drop them in our Q&A chat, just as a reminder. And we're also dropping relevant links in our webinar chat. But just take a moment, pause to see if there are any questions from our webinar attendees. Okay. So even if you're typing a question now, feel free to, and if you have questions throughout, again, you're welcome to ask them along the way, but just wanted to take a moment to provide a space. But we're gonna go ahead and keep moving along. So the next portion, which I assume many of you are interested in learning more about, are the application components and how to craft the most competitive application and make sure that your proposal contains everything that it needs to qualify and to be reviewed. So the first stage in this process, in this opportunity, is the notice of intent to submit form. So this is open right now, and this is the first thing due with this fellowship opportunity. So things to keep in mind: you are required, in order to submit a full application, to fill out a notice of intent. And the notice of intent form can be found on the request for application webpage. It's also just been dropped in our webinar chat. And some things to keep in mind. So this is a Google form. So if you are clicking the Google form for the first time, you're going to see a lot of questions. So it might be best for you to sort of grab those questions and place them in a separate document, because it's going to take some time to develop your responses to them, to inform us of the details we need when discussing your project and describing it. So something to keep in mind: this is not evaluated. This is just to inform the Delta of who is intending to apply and submit a full application. It's also going to allow us to identify the best reviewers for the review panels. And we'll talk about that in just a moment, of what those review panels look like and how to, in your notice of intent, identify which panel you would like your application to be reviewed by. So something else too, as you can see, and I won't run through all of these components, but in the third bullet here, we've listed out what is included in the NOI. And you can see that when you're filling out the NOI, you're going to identify what review track you want your proposal to be reviewed by. So we offer a social science track, a biophysical science track. We also have a third option, which is your proposal can be reviewed, co-reviewed by both tracks if you feel like it contains both research and educational elements of the social and biophysical sciences. So if you would like more assistance in understanding which track your proposal should be reviewed by, we encourage you to email us at that SG proposal email to ask us more questions to see what best fits your application. Something also with your notice of intent. So one of the parts of this application is you're going to have your research mentor, but you also want to make sure that you're identifying a community mentor or community mentors. So when filling out the notice of intent, applicants should identify in the notice of intent if you are going to need help in identifying a community mentor. And there's an option for that in the form. And when doing so, if you're someone who's going to need support in identifying a mentor in the community, provide as much sufficient information as possible regarding your project. That's going to help inform the Delta Science program of what resources they need to share with you, what support they can provide, in identifying the right personnel. So make sure you have enough project details available that are going to help support you and in finding a community mentor. And again, that is something that Delta will help you identify and provide your resources for. We did have a question in our Q&A, and it was if there is any flexibility in the start date for the fellowship. So for example, can a start date be later than February 2025? And I'm going to allow one of my colleagues to help answer this, just given past experience. And I know this has been an adjusted timeline as is, but.
Yeah, so at this time, we're not offering flexibility in the start date for the fellowship. It does need to start February of 2025. There are situations where sometimes we have partner organizations come in and help complement Delta's funds with their own, and they may be more flexible in the start date of the fellowships. But it is important, we try to keep as best as possible the cohort to be cohesive and have similar timelines for reporting and everything like that. So right now we are maintaining that time. So I would suggest, unless if you have a reason that is preventing you from being able to apply that requires a different start date, email us so we can understand what the situation is. But for now, that is our firm start date.
Thanks, Leon. And if you don't mind, I'm going to keep Leon on for a question we had come through the chat because it does regard the Delta Science Awards. So it was if one can submit the same proposal to the 2025 Delta Science Awards and this fellowship opportunity. And I will say the second part of the question, wondering if the proposal requirements are similar. I encourage you to read the proposal requirements for the Delta Science Award, just since this is a webinar for the Delta Science Fellowship. But Leon, would one person be able to apply to both with the same proposal?
I was going to wait. Let's do that one after we go through the proposal components.
Okay.
So we can talk about that holistically. Thanks.
Great. All right, thanks for your questions, everyone. So notice of intent. In the form, you'll notice we'll ask a question if you need support identifying community mentors. So go ahead and keep those elements in mind, again, to just prepare and give yourself enough time. The notice of intent is due in a little over a month, so June 24th by 5 p.m. So make sure you have that date saved. All right, so the technical review panels, I touched on this, but just another slide to remind you that you will identify what track you would like your proposal to be reviewed by. And so there's a biophysical track, a social science track. There's also the opportunity for your proposal to be co-reviewed. So start thinking about that. You can reach out to that person who's going to potentially serve as your research mentor to help understand which review panel you would want to choose for your proposal. And in doing so, this is done in the NOI. It allows the Delta enough time to start to build the reviewers for those two tracks. So the sooner you get in your notice of intent, the better. All right, we're going to dive into each of these components, but just wanted to provide an overview of what the application contains. So this application is obviously it's not currently open yet because right now it's the notice of intent phase. So once that deadline passes June 24th, we will be looking at those NOIs and inviting those folks to submit a full application. So you will be invited via what is known as EC Grant, which is our application portal that we utilize. And so you will develop a registration through EC Grant. And you will apply through there and upload all of your application materials in that platform. But you can see it, the application will contain a signed title page, a project summary, which you are providing details on in your notice of intent form, a project narrative, which is the largest component of your application. Within your project narrative, you can see there are 4 components within the proposed research, which can be up to 12 pages long. Management needs, your personal statement, and your CVs of your undergraduate and graduate program. You will also be invited to start to build your budget. So a budget and justification, which is going to be available to applicants in a spreadsheet template that will be accessed via EC Grant. You'll also need letters of support. So it's 2 letters of support this application round from a community mentor and a research mentor. I should say a community member and a research mentor. And then 2 letters of academic recommendation and your transcripts from your undergraduate and graduate degrees. So the application is due August 26th by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Now, the notice of intent is via a Google form, which if there are any troubles submitting your notice of intent, please email us if you're having trouble accessing the form, submitting the form. That form doesn't necessarily get inundated with folks trying to click submit at the same time. However, what we want to really note with our online application portal, EC Grant, is that it's really important you are not waiting until the last moment to submit your application if invited to do so. So that's something that we can, we'll touch on later on, and when revisiting the RFA throughout this process. There will be a note about it, but please note that it's really important to provide yourself enough time to submit via EC Grant. All right, so the first component is the signed title page. And this is going to be a title page that has approval signatures from your research mentor, your PI, and your campus. Now, on the title page, you will provide summary information about your project, your budget, and it's going to include these approval signatures. Now, what's important with these signatures is that you have to provide enough time for the sponsored projects office at your institution to review your budget and to calculate those rates, approve that budget, and then provide you the signature needed for this signed title page. Sometimes those offices on campus can take up to 2 weeks to review budgets with you and to understand how your award will be given to you through your institution. So it's really important to provide your campus that 2-week window to get those signatures. So you might want to build that in when thinking about building out your application once the NOI deadline has passed. So you'll be asked also within your signed title page and probably with your campus when approving your budget to provide information about any animal subjects or even recumbent DNA technology or research. So those are things to keep in mind that can take time. It's some of that red tape you might have to work through. Every academic institution has different policies in place, so it's really dependent on your campus. So make sure you're providing enough time to get those signatures, which if you back up a step, meaning having your budget working with your campus in order to approve your budget that you're going to put into your proposal. All right, so the next part of the application is the project summary. And this project summary, it's going to be some brief sections for objectives, methodology, and rationale. So this is important that you are revisiting those resources, the Delta Stewardship Council, the Delta Science Program, those management needs with those science actions. So referring to the relevance to high priority Delta science actions is going to be important in building out your project summary. It's really important, and we have some notes here. Be clear, be compelling, be engaging. Make sure you're mentioning the Delta, the needs of the Delta, and really understanding how your research connects is going to support the goals and objectives of the Delta Stewardship Council and the work that they're doing in the San Joaquin region. This is most widely consulted description of your project. So you want to write it last. This is an important piece because it's going to help kind of encapsulate everything. Throughout this, you're delivering small bits and pieces. With that being the start of when you're submitting your NOI, you're providing a brief project description. But one of our key things to provide in terms of a tip is to write your project summary last. Keep in mind, it's only a page long. So when we say clear, compelling, and engaging, you have a page to do so. And again, these sort of application component elements of the page limits, the font size, the margins can be found on the RFA. All right, the second component, the largest of your application, one of the largest is the project narrative. I'm going to go through this briefly, and I do want to just potentially invite Maggie again to just discuss how the science action agenda can be utilized as a really important resource when writing your project narrative, if you have anything to add, Maggie. So let me just briefly go over what the project narrative looks like. It's got 4 sections. The first one is going to be a proposed research section. This is going to be a large section. Within your proposed research section, you're going to want to keep things in mind, like what questions you're asking in your research, what objectives you're trying to meet. Another thing to consider is what is your approach and plan in conducting your research? What are the anticipated benefits and what are the broader impacts? And when thinking about broader impacts, thinking about the Delta, but also the communities surrounding the Delta, and how this can inform future decisions regarding policy and research. Some other things you'll include in the proposed research section is what are your anticipated outputs and products? Think about that in 1 to 2 year spans. If you're requesting up to 2 years of support, what does that look like after year 1? What does it look like after year 2? And the last thing is you are going to include literature citations, but these will not be counted towards the 12-page limit for the proposed research section. So just keep that in mind. It's not included in that 12-page limit. So that's the largest portion of your project narrative. And I think I'll, pause there to allow Maggie to talk about how the action agenda is really relevant in writing this part of the application.
Great. So I'll maybe just add a little more detail than I did when I first kind of touched on the subject of the science action agenda a few slides ago. So your application is going to be scored competitively based on how the proposed research addresses one or more of the priority science actions that are identified in, again, it's the 2022 to 2026 science action agenda. So we require that you explicitly identify at least one specific science action out of a list that's in our document of 25 prioritized actions, and provide in your narrative a description of how your research connects to this action. And so while I just to kind of clarify, I know it can be a little bit confusing when we talk about science actions and management needs. I think it's laid out pretty nicely in the document. So hopefully as you explore that, you'll see things a bit more clearly, but while they're more focused than the concepts that are underlying, like the 6 management needs that were listed in the slide I showed a little bit ago, science actions are actually intentionally cross-cutting and integrative. And that means that they're not probably likely to be addressed through a single project. And so your proposal should really show how your project's contributing to addressing that topic, but you don't necessarily need to feel that your project is fully responsible or fully aligned, with that single action. And on the other hand, your project may actually contribute to addressing more than one science action. And so we actually have in the full RFA a description of how your project narrative can also demonstrate how you're addressing up to 2 additional science actions. It's not required, but it's there because it's often that you'll see that. So if you have any questions about the science action agenda, again, we invite you to reach out to us, explore both our website and the document itself a bit. You can also explore examples of how previous funded research, including for past fellowships, have been tied to the science action agenda as listed on our website, and also again in that Delta Science Tracker website.
Great, thanks so much, Maggie. Some other components of the project narrative, the management needs and science actions. So this is a 1-page limit. And again, thinking about the overarching management need and specific science actions within it, how those relate to your project. And again, referring to the science action agenda is going to be vital with this piece. You'll write a personal statement. You have 2 pages to write and develop your personal statement, thinking back to our commitment of wanting to provide the most inclusive opportunities in this fellowship, having the personal statement be an opportunity to tell us your story and tell us your background, and how that really has informed your career goals, your academic journey. So being really intentional with the personal statement is going to greatly benefit your application. And then 2-page limit for each CV. So those can be, keeping in mind that you have to include that within your project narrative. So yeah, this is project narrative. Again, a really large piece of your application. This is probably going to take you the most time in developing and revisiting the project summary. Keep in mind that that's something you want to write last. So focusing on this project narrative is going to be probably where you want to spend the majority of your time. Now the budget and budget justification. So thinking back to the signed title page, which is going to be page 1 of your application, where you need to acquire those campus signatures, your signature from your PI. So once you are provided access to the full proposal and EC grant, and that's after the notice of intent submission deadline has passed, you're going to use a budget spreadsheet to plan out your budget. And so you will have access to this NEC grant, and you're going to plan your budget with your mentor in your academic institution. So some things to keep in mind. You are highly, highly encouraged to work with your research advisor in your campus with your budget. There's going to be elements of your budget you haven't potentially worked in before, in terms of understanding, again, what portion would be for, tuition if you're going to be a PhD or master's fellow, and then what are some of those R&E costs. And then your campus will help to determine what their rates and policies look like and how those affect those research and education costs for supplies. So some other things to keep in mind is that you want to really carefully review the budget instructions, which will be provided to you once you're given full access to the application. This will ensure that your budget is properly prepared, and so therefore you can obtain the signatures needed for your assigned title page. So with this too, we're encouraging you to get in touch with your campus sooner than later, to at least let them know that you're going to be using them as a resource in building out this budget and understanding the policies in place and the different rates in place with your academic institution. That way you can provide yourself sufficient time in preparing that and getting approval, getting those signatures, and then therefore your application will be ready to submit. So we encourage you to do this once the notice of intent deadline has passed. So at this time, focus on that. But once that deadline passes in a month, get in touch with your campus. All right, so letters and transcripts. So you're going to be requiring letters of support from mentors. So this will be a 2-page limit. So this is going to be from a research mentor and a community mentor. So these are, again, going to be your research mentor, pretty straightforward, potentially just your PI who's working in your lab. However, the community mentor, if you need help identifying community mentor, you're going to let us know that in the notice of intent form. The Delta will reach out, help provide you resources to identify those members. You can also think about utilizing the science tracker and seeing what folks in your region are working in your research related topic. And those are potential members you could reach out to support your application. We're going to be requesting 2 letters of academic recommendation. These can each be 2 pages long. Again, keep in mind that you're providing your letter writers enough time to write these letters of recommendation for you. And then the way these letters get submitted is they're submitted directly through EC grant. So in the application, when given access, there's going to be part of the application where you will input your letter writers' emails, their names, and you will click submit. And that is a portion where you're identifying who your letter writers are. They get sent an email directly from EC grant where they're told, informed that they have been selected to be a letter writer for you, and that there will be an opportunity for them to register an EC grant and upload and submit their letter. So you'll be able to see in your application in EC grant when they have or have not submitted a letter yet. So it'll show as a green dot when a letter has been uploaded. And if you don't see that green dot, it means it has not. So make sure you provide your letter writers enough time to do that. Again, when invited to the application, you can always reach out to us to help check for you if a letter has been submitted, because those letters need to be submitted before the application deadline. The last thing is that copies of transcripts are also required. Unofficial copies are okay. So just keep in mind that with your transcripts, you want to be redacting any personal information. So student ID numbers, and anything that would be considered personal information. All right, so the evaluation process, we wanted to talk about this a little bit. We talk about it in the RFA, but we wanted to just touch on it on how these proposals are getting evaluated. So you can see that we have a couple of different evaluation criteria, and you can see the two sections that weigh the heaviest. The first one, 25% of the evaluation is put towards the quality of the research project proposal, and including how appropriate it is to this fellowship opportunity. So that's weighted at 25%. What's also weighted at 25% is the importance of the proposed research to the priority topics identified. So as Maggie mentioned, you're going to need to be identifying a priority topic in the science action agenda. And then thereafter, you can identify up to 2 more if relevant to your project proposal. So you can see the importance of utilizing the science action agenda as a resource in building your application, because it's going to weigh very heavy in terms of evaluating these applications. You're going to see at 20% is your academic performance relative to your academic journey. And then also just thinking about the achievements you've made throughout your academic career experience, your career goal statement. Some other things that are evaluated are your methodology and the questions being addressed in your proposal. The support of your research and community mentors. So how are they going to provide you support throughout your fellowship? What are they providing in terms of contributions, and the quality and strength of that interaction? That's weighted at 10%. And then you can see there's sort of this overall evaluation, which is the bottom section here at 10%. So just thinking about the degree to which the proposed activity will achieve beneficial, broader societal relevant impacts. And that's something that's being considered with the Delta Science program, also with the California Sea Grant value included. So just keep those things in mind. This is the evaluation criteria. We're always happy to answer more questions about it. And how does the evaluation and actual selection process happen? So this criteria is being used by our evaluators, but then what does the selection process look like? So full applications are due in August 26th. And that's when we will have our review panels already built out, because we use the notices of intent to help inform and build the best reviewers for those 2 tracks. And that's done by California Sea Grant and the Delta Science program. Typically, these are outside independent expert reviewers from a relevant discipline, and those disciplines being relevant to your project proposals. They review all of the applications using those criteria sections, and then they will recommend finalists to the Delta for funding. Final decision is made by the Delta lead scientist. And again, we have the funding to support up to 5 fellows for this opportunity this year. So that is how the selection process looks. So you know, these are due the end of August, and you can expect to be notified sometime in November. I believe we have a more specific date when we touch on timeline here. And actually, I think it's the next slide. Yes, perfect. So this is the timetable. So you can see notices of intent forms are due in a little over a month. And we try to have a pretty quick turnaround to look at who is notifying us they want to apply, and then opening up those applications to you via EC Grant. And then those applications will be due August 26th through EC Grant. Nothing is emailed to California Sea Grant. No application materials are emailed to us. This is all done through the EC Grant portal. And then sometime in November is when we want to be able to notify you of the selection results, because then it's a quick turnaround to have a start date no later than February 2025 for the funds to be awarded and for you to start your fellowship. So, and this is, again, you can request up to 2 years of financial support. So it is potentially an opportunity that you would be ending this fellowship in January of 2027. All right. So one last thing is we touched on, I'm not sure if we touched on this yet, but please note that due to the constraints inherent to the funding source, no time extensions beyond dates specified in the award will be possible. So that is the no time extensions cannot be rewarded beyond the 2 years. So 2 years is the maximum you can request support for this fellowship opportunity. So these are really broad dates, really important dates to remember. I think our next slide, we're just going to pause for some questions about any and all of those application components. I know we had a question regarding the Delta Science Awards we wanted to revisit. So I'll let Leon hop on to kind of address, I think, that question from earlier.
Yeah, so it's a interesting question because we do have both of these opportunities open right now. There are some similarities in these two opportunities in just that they're both funding from the Delta Stewardship Council. They both are addressing the priorities of the science action agenda that's currently active. But I think there's a really big difference in the components of the various applications for each of these and what evaluation criteria is going to be used to evaluate the quality of the proposals. There's also slightly different review processes for each of them. So I would encourage anyone who's potentially involved in either of these to review both very carefully. The Delta Research Awards are potentially very large projects, and I think there's going to be a lot more competition for those, just because it's not just graduate students and postdocs who can apply, it's everyone who could be working on relevant science in the Delta that is applying. So it's a very different ballgame, I think, between these two. And then as far as submitting the same proposal, just as far as my research coordinator hat goes, submitting the same proposal to two different groups is not advisable, because what would happen if both were funded, you're effectively asking for the same money to do the same work, and that's technically fraudulent. So you really should be making sure you're carving out complementary work such that if you get awarded either of those, you're going to be making progress on either award. And if you get awarded both of them, they're strengthening each other. But you can't guarantee, obviously, that you're going to get awarded either a Delta Science Fellowship or a Delta Research Award. So I think it's best to work with your project team or with your mentor to think about how to strategically apply to either of these opportunities, because they are both wonderful, great opportunities. But we're administering both competitions. We're going to know what you're submitting, and I would not advise to submit the same proposal for the same cost to both competitions. And definitely, if Maggie or George have any other thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. That's my perspective on it.
Thanks so much, Leon. Yeah, so keep those in mind. Like Leon said, talk with your project team. You're welcome to reach out to sgproposal@ucsd.edu. We'll drop that in the chat again later at the end of our webinar, which we have just a few more slides to go through if you want to discuss with us and ask more questions. All right, we're doing great on time. We're probably going to end a little early. So we have a couple more slides to go through. So application tips. So these are really important things to keep in mind when building your application. Obviously, meeting all of the deadlines, exceptions will not be granted. So as I mentioned with the notice of intent, that's via a Google form. So typically those are quick submissions because they're not getting inundated. It's not a ton of information. It's a few questions to just inform us of your intent to apply. However, with the EC grant application, as you looked at the components, one of the components is 12 pages. You have transcripts you're uploading. You have letters of recommendation from your letter writers. You have multiple narratives that you're developing, a budget spreadsheet. So there's a lot of components just for one applicant. And the system is accepting multiple applicants for this opportunity. So giving yourself enough time to submit via EC grant. We really advise not even waiting till the day that it's due, but at least doing it the day before, and especially not waiting until you're butting up until that 5 p.m. deadline, because it can take up to 15, sometimes 20 minutes for the actual application to submit if you're submitting the same time as other folks. So please give yourself ample time. This is hopefully clear, but we love to just state this, and that is just to read all application instructions carefully. Make sure you're answering the questions, make sure you're being clear and concise, and utilizing all of those narratives to tell the story you want to tell in terms of your research proposal, and giving us those components that way you can be evaluated properly. Thinking about the questions you're asking, those deliverables, what are going to be the broader impacts of your research. Clear and engaging proposals stand out in reviewers' minds. Make sure you accomplish that, especially in the project summary introduction. So just write an engaging proposal. Think about this from a reviewer standpoint. They're reading multiple applications. They're coming from subject areas where they have that expertise. So think about who you're speaking to when you're developing your application. Who are the reviewers? These are reviewers that are going to be sitting either on a biophysical science track, social science track, and then obviously your proposal can be reviewed by both. But remember who your reviewers are when you're writing your application. Assume that you are writing for a reviewer in a somewhat related field, but not directly. So relating this back to my point I just made before, these are reviewers that are going to be experts within social sciences, biophysical sciences. But if you are someone who's proposing work with something incredibly specific, don't assume that they know what you are talking about in terms of your particular research. So define those terms, spell out your acronyms, make sure you're speaking clearly to the reviewer so they can get a landscape of what your work is and be able to relate it to where their expertise lies. So make sure you're being specific enough, but you can also remember that you are writing for folks who have relevant experience within this field. Some other things keep in mind, utilize the Delta Science Tracker. We've been talking about this, but utilize this to help identify community mentors if you need that help. Refer to the Science Action Agenda. That's really important. We've been talking about that throughout the webinar. Some things to keep in mind. These are common errors that happen when we see applications for the Delta Science Fellowship. Your proposal is too ambitious, promises too much for too little money and/or time, is unrealistic. So set realistic standards. This is where it's going to be really important that you're working with your research mentor. They have that experience. Lean on them during this application in order to understand what's really feasible when proposing what your research is going to be and how much money you're asking for. There are no testable hypotheses. A proposal that is primarily descriptive is less favorably received. Keep that in mind again when thinking about the ambition behind your research project. Another common error is that proposal is fragmented and disjointed, meaning it doesn't flow. Different parts were obviously written by different colleagues. So if you're having your research mentor help write one part, you're having other folks in your project team write other components, you're writing components. As that comes together, it needs to be cohesive, it needs to flow. So keep that in mind. Usually reviewers can tell if something has been hastily assembled and put together. Writing style is something that is noticeable when you're reading multiple applications. Something else is that another error we see is there's not enough detail or there's unclear research methods. A big one you want to also keep in mind is that sometimes we get proposals that don't fit with the purpose of the RFA or address priority topic areas. So make sure that it is relevant to this opportunity and that it is addressing it. Another thing that is a common error that you don't want to do is that the proposal does not mention or make connections to the Delta. This is the Delta Science Fellowship, so remember that when writing your application. A couple other things that we tend to see is you have too long of an introduction. This is when it comes back to being concise and clear. Plan of work and research methods are too short, too vague. If you're not providing enough details, you don't have, you have inadequate expertise within partnerships, whether that's partnership through your community mentor or your research mentor. Make sure your proposal does not lack what the broader impacts are going to be to the Delta. And a couple other things, again, how is the role of your mentor going to support your fellowship opportunity? So again, thinking about your whole application package very holistically. You're writing it in parts, it's going to feel potentially disjointed at certain times, but it's really important, again, providing yourself enough time. The notices of intent close in a month, and then you're going to have 3 months to write your application. So you have enough time to gather all those components, have folks look at your application for you, but make sure it flows, make sure it feels like it's not a disjointed piece of a research project and those pieces from your mentors, but making sure it's all connecting and it's all feasible within if you're asking for up to 2 years of support. The last thing is be realistic. What permits are you going to need? We get proposals where they're not describing what permits are necessary for the work to be done. So keep that in mind as well. What are going to be the necessary permits that you'll need to acquire throughout your 1 or 2 years of research? Sorry, it's 2 months to submit the full proposal, not 3 months. I'm getting ahead of myself. 2 months still, plenty of time. So give yourself the space to go through all those components. All right, we are going to be wrapping up our webinar. I wanted to just provide you who your points of contact are throughout this fellowship opportunity. So myself and Leon Guo, we are with California Sea Grant. So if you are writing us at sgproposal@ucsd.edu, which Leon just dropped in our webinar chat, we monitor that email, so we'll be responding to you about this fellowship opportunity. With the Delta Science Program, your leads are George Isaac and Maggie Chrisman. So they obviously joined us for our webinar today to provide insight on how you can make yourself competitive with the Delta and the review panels that we're going to be building out for those 2 different tracks. And please keep in mind, you want to always be revisiting the RFA. That's where you're going to have the most up-to-date information. So today, as of May 22nd, this is all of the information we have that is the most up-to-date. However, things can change depending on outside variables, budgets, timelines, and things that we're working through with our agencies and organizations. So please refer to the RFA for the most up-to-date information. And lastly, we just want to say thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen in on our webinar, ask the questions that you've been asking, and give us an opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about this opportunity. So this is a recorded webinar, so we'll be posting this on the RFA. And we will also be uploading the slides so you can revisit those slides. And again, you can always reach out to us if you have any questions. We did just get a question in the chat, and it was, how many people typically apply for this opportunity? So this is a great question. It really just depends on the year and what other fellowships we're running. So as Leon mentioned, we also have the Delta Science Awards that we're also running at the same time. So I think with that, some of the focus areas are similar. So that's going to potentially break up the amount of applicants for both opportunities. But in terms of the amount of people, it really just depends. It depends on this runs every 2 years. It depends on what other fellowships we have open. There is up to 5 fellows that we can support with the Delta Science Fellowship. And keep in mind, this is a long process. So many folks, they don't have the time to dedicate to applying to this opportunity because it is May and you're not finding out until potentially November of your status. So oftentimes that time frame can determine how many folks we have apply. Leon, you can potentially help answer, like in the past, maybe the numbers, but again, it's a 2-year cycle, so it can vary, but any insight you have would be appreciated.
Yeah, like the lady said, it really depends. Like there's probably a limited number of institutions that work, of all the potential ones that could, there's a limited number that work specifically on the Delta or on topics that are of high relevance to the Delta. So I think there's some kind of narrowing down of groups there. I would want to say we probably get like 20 to 40 applicants, but I'd be curious from Maggie's perspective. Since COVID, a lot of application numbers have gone down in general, which is really interesting. Just across the board, all opportunities, we've had less applications than usual. And then one clarification I just wanted to make was that we're potentially funding approximately 5 fellows. It really depends because there's a different cost between the postdocs and the graduate students. Depending on, who is getting selected, it will affect the number of fellows that we award, just because that will affect the total amount of money that we need to put in to basically cover the cost of the fellows. So it could be 4, it could be 6. It really just depends on what we get. So we hope to see your application.
Thanks so much, Leon. And yeah, and with that, we want to just say thank you once again. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. And we wish you best of luck in submitting your notice of intent, and then hopefully, invite you to submit a full project proposal via the EC grant application. So thanks, everyone. I also want to thank Leon Goa, Maggie Chrisman, and George Isaac for joining us to also provide really important information regarding this opportunity. Thank you all once again, and have a wonderful day. Thanks, everybody.